The Tale of the Corpse Bride. Written by A.I. Chapter 1. A haunting love story. It was a picturesque Victorian village, with cobbled streets and charming cottages lining the outskirts. In the center of the town was a grand mansion, belonging to the affluent Van Dort family. Victor Van Dort, the only son of the nouveau riche merchant, was a shy and clumsy young man, who spent most of his days engrossed in his father's business. But his life was about to change when he received news that his family had arranged his marriage to the daughter of the bankrupt de Vergluk family. Victoria de Vergluk was a beautiful and elegant young lady, known for her grace and poise despite their financial struggles. It was a marriage of convenience, meant to bring two families together and secure their fortunes. Excitement and nervousness filled the air as the two families gathered for the first time to meet their future in-laws. The Van Dorts were greeted with disdain by the Evergluts, who saw them as upstarts with no real class. And the Van Dorts, in turn, saw the Evergluts as a symbol of their fading glory. But as soon as Victor and Victoria laid eyes on each other, all their preconceived notions were shattered. They were immediately drawn to each other, and for the first time, Victor felt a flutter in his heart. Victoria, too, found herself mesmerized by Victor's gentle nature and kind eyes. As the family sat down to dinner, Victor and Victoria stole glances at each other, unable to take their eyes off the other. They both knew that their future was decided by their parents, but they couldn't help the growing fondness they felt for one another. The next day, the families gathered for a wedding rehearsal, and Victor's nerves got the best of him. He stumbled and fumbled through his vows, much to the dismay of the strict pastor. Victoria couldn't help but laugh at Victor's mishaps, which only made her more endearing to him. Ashamed of his incompetence, Victor wandered off into the nearby forest, seeking solace in the peaceful surroundings. As he practiced his vows to the trees, he placed the wedding ring on what he thought was a branch. But to his surprise, the branch turned out to be a bony hand, belonging to a corpse bride.
Chapter 2. Beneath the Veil. Victor had always been a curious and adventurous soul, so when he stumbled upon a mysterious branch during his evening walk in the woods, he couldn't help but investigate. As he reached out to touch the gnarled branch, he felt a sudden coldness wash over him. In that moment, he heard a soft voice whisper his name. Victor. Startled, he turned around but saw no one there. The voice seemed to be coming from the branch itself. He hesitantly reached out again, and this time, he felt a sharp tug as if the branch was pulling him towards something. Curiosity getting the better of him, Victor allowed himself to be pulled. To his amazement, the branch began to grow and stretch, forming a hand with long, delicate fingers. Victor couldn't believe his eyes as the hand took hold of his own and pulled him deeper into the woods. Soon, the trees and the ground beneath him started to blur, and when everything came to a stop, Victor found himself in a strange and surprisingly festive place. He was surrounded by brightly colored decorations, music, and laughter. But most astonishing of all was the sight of a beautiful bride walking towards him. Her face lit up with a smile as she approached him. "Welcome to the land of the dead, Victor. I've been waiting for you." Victor's heart skipped a beat at the sight of her, and he couldn't help but feel drawn to her. She introduced herself as Emily, and with every passing moment, Victor couldn't help but feel more and more enamored by her. As they began to talk, he learned that Emily was the one who had brought him here. She explained that she had been so excited about her upcoming wedding that she had risen from the grave to find her groom. But instead, she had found Victor. She told him that she had been murdered in the woods on the night of her elopement, and ever since, she had been searching for her killer.
Chapter 3. Solving the Mystery of the Corpse Bride. Victor had been waiting for this moment for what seemed like an eternity. Ever since he was reunited with his beloved Emily in the land of the dead, he had been plotting and planning for a way to return to the land of the living and see his true love once again. And finally, his plan was coming together. He had sought out the help of the magical Elder Gupknecht, who had the power to grant temporary passages between the two worlds. Although hesitant at first, Elder Gupknecht was convinced to help Victor after the young man pleaded with him, mentioning that he wished to introduce Emily to his parents. The elder finally agreed, but warned Victor that the passage would only last for one night before they would be forcefully returned to the land of the dead. Strapped to the back of a skeletal horse, Victor and Emily rode through the dark, winding tunnels that led to the portal between the two worlds. Emily was nervous, but Victor reassured her that everything would be fine. He had missed his parents terribly and he couldn't wait to see their reactions to Emily. As they emerged from the portal, Victor couldn't contain his excitement. He quickly took Emily's hand and led her through the familiar streets of his hometown. People passing by stopped and stared in shock at the sight of the skeletal bride walking hand in hand with a living man. But Victor couldn't care less. He was too focused on one thing, seeing Victoria again. He had left her heartbroken on their wedding day when he had accidentally proposed to Emily instead. Now, he wanted to make things right and confess his true feelings for her. Without a second thought, he rushed to Victoria's house, dragging Emily along behind him. As they reached the front door, Victor's heart raced with anticipation. He knocked frantically, but there was no answer. He tried the door and to his relief, it was open. As they stepped inside, Victor was greeted by the familiar sights and smells of his childhood home. He led Emily to the living room, where he knew his parents would be waiting. But instead of finding his parents, he saw Victoria sitting on the couch, tears streaming down her face. At the sound of the door opening, Victoria looked up and saw Victor standing there, along with Emily. Confusion and hurt filled her eyes as she realized what was happening. She had thought that Victor had left her for good, and here he was, with another woman. Emily finally understood the true reason for their trip to the land of the living. She felt betrayed and heartbroken. She knew that no matter how much she loved Victor, he still had feelings for Victoria. In a fit of rage, she dragged Victor back to the portal, leaving Victoria in tears once again.
Chapter 4: The Corpse Bride's Revenge. Victoria sat nervously at the dinner table, her hands shaking as she tried to hide the fear in her eyes. She took a deep breath and looked around the table at her parents, knowing that she had to tell them the truth. "Mother, Father, I have something to tell you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Her parents, Lord and Lady of Erdla, raised their eyebrows in curiosity. They had always been strict with their daughter, often dismissing her claims and thoughts as silly and childish. Victoria knew that they wouldn't take her seriously, but she had to try. "It's about Victor," she continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "He's in trouble. I saw him being taken away by a corpse in the village. I think she was kidnapping him." Her parents exchanged a look before bursting into laughter. "My dear, are you feeling well?" Lady of Erdla asked, trying to hold back her giggles. "Victor is a strong young man. I'm sure he can handle himself." Victoria felt tears sting her eyes. She had hoped that this time, they would believe her. But once again, her warning fell on deaf ears. "Victoria, stop this nonsense and finish your meal," her father commanded, his tone stern. Feeling defeated, Victoria pushed her plate away and stood up. "I'm not making this up, I swear," she pleaded, tears now streaming down her cheeks. "Please, you have to believe me." But her parents only shook their heads and dismissed her from the room. With a heavy heart, Victoria retreated to her bedroom. As she paced back and forth, she couldn't shake off the feeling that time was running out for Victor. Determined to do something, Victoria quickly packed a bag and made her way to the back entrance of the mansion. She had seen her father lock the door earlier, but she was sure she could pick the lock and escape. However, her plans were cut short as she heard a loud bang on the door. "Victoria, come out here this instant," her father's voice thundered through the wood. Panicking, Victoria rushed to the door, only to find it locked. She tried desperately to pick the lock, but it wouldn't budge. As she looked around frantically, she spotted a window on the side of the house. With no other option, she smashed it open and climbed out, ignoring the cuts and bruises on her hands. But even as she ran towards the village, she knew it was too late. Victor was nowhere to be found, and there was no trace of the corpse. Victoria's heart sank as she realized that she had failed to save her beloved. As days passed without any news of Victor, Victoria's parents started to make plans for her future. They had received a proposal from a wealthy and titled lord named Barkus Bittern, and they were determined to marry her off to him.
Chapter 5 Till desto aspart. Emily sat on her bed, staring blankly at the whites of her bedroom. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. She couldn't believe that Victor, the love of her life, had been lying to her all this time. How could he do this to her? Just a few hours ago, Emily had stumbled upon a conversation between Victor and his friend, Victoria. They were laughing, when Victoria suddenly confessed her feelings for Victor. Emily's heart dropped when she heard Victor say that he had been using her to make Victoria jealous. It was all a part of their plan to get back together. Devastated, Emily had stormed out of the room, not wanting to hear anything else. She felt like a fool for falling for Victor's smooth words and charming ways. She thought he had truly cared for her, but now it seemed like it was all just a ploy. This went by and Emily couldn't bring herself to face Victor. She avoided his apologies, not ready to confront him about his deceit. But as much as her heart ached, she couldn't let go of the memories they had shared together. It was only when she overheard a conversation between her friends that she realized she needed closure. Did you hear about Victor and Victoria? One of her friends said excitedly. They're getting back together. Apparently, they've been in love since they met, another friend added. Emily's heart sank at the news. She couldn't believe that Victor would go back to Victoria after everything they had been through together. But as she thought about it more, she realized that Victor and Victoria probably did belong together. They had a deep connection that Emily could never compete with. With a heavy heart, Emily decided to confront Victor. She walked up to him and his friends, a look of sadness in her eyes. Victor's face fell when he saw her, realizing that she must have heard about him and Victoria. "I am sorry, Emily," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I never meant to hurt you. It's just that Victoria and I have this bond, and he couldn't resist it any longer." Emily nodded, trying to keep her tears at bay. "I understand. We just wish you had been honest with me from the beginning." "I know, and I'm sorry," Victor said sincerely. "I never wanted to hurt you."
Chapter 6: The Secret of the Corpse Bride. Victor stood in shock as he watched his recently deceased coachman, Mayhew, materialize in front of him in the afterlife. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. The last time he saw Mayhew, he was dead on the ground, and now here he was, standing before him in a world beyond the living. "Victor, my boy," Mayhew said with a solemn expression. "I've come to tell you something important." Victor was still in shock, unable to fully process what was happening. "What is it, Mayhew?" "I've been watching over you, Victor," Mayhew began. "And I couldn't bear to see you suffer any longer. I want to tell you about Victoria's impending wedding to Lord Barkis." Victor's heart dropped at the mention of his beloved Victoria marrying another man. He had been so consumed with grief after his sudden passing that he hadn't even considered the thought of her moving on. And now, to hear that she was getting married to Lord Barkis, a man known for his cruel nature and lack of love for Victoria, was like a punch to the gut. Feeling utterly betrayed, Victor's thoughts immediately turned to Emily, the beautiful, kind, and understanding corpse bride he had met in the land of the dead. He knew that in this realm, they could truly be together, but Victoria's impending marriage threatened to keep them apart. Without hesitation, Victor made up his mind. "I cannot let this happen," he declared determinedly. "I will not stand by and watch Victoria marry that heartless man. I must end my own life so I can properly marry Emily." Mayhew's expression softened. He had known all along that Victor and Emily were meant to be together, and he was determined to make sure it happened. "Then let us go upstairs to the land of the living, and we will hold your wedding in the town church," he said. Together, they traveled through the veil that separated the world of the living from the world of the dead. As they emerged on the other side, the living townspeople were struck with terror at the sight of the dead walking among them. But their fear soon dissipated as they recognized their departed relatives and loved ones among them.
Chapter 7: Whispers from the Grave. Victoria's heart raced as she hurried down the cobbled streets towards the church. She had received an urgent message from the priest that Victor was in danger. She feared the worst, and her fears were confirmed as she burst through the doors of the church. There he was, standing by the altar with a bottle of poison in his hand. Victoria's eyes widened in horror as she realized what he was about to do. Without hesitation, she ran towards him, shouting his name. At the sound of her voice, Victor turned to face her, a look of surprise and despair on his face. But before he could drink the poison, a figure appeared behind him. Emily, Victor's former lover, had been hiding in the shadows, watching his every move. With a swift movement, Emily knocked the bottle out of Victor's hand, saving his life. Victor and Victoria shared a moment of relief and gratitude, but it was short-lived as they were interrupted by a loud voice. It was Lord Barkis, Victoria's betrothed. As if on cue, he entered the church, his cold eyes fixed on Victoria. "Victoria, my dear wife, how lovely to see you, he said with a sneer. But before Victoria could respond, Emily stepped forward. You have no right to call her your wife, Barkis. You know well that I am the one who holds that title, she said, her voice oozing with anger and disgust. Lord Barkis laughed, his eyes narrowing in recognition. Poor Emily, how fortunate that I have found you at last, he said, his voice laced with malice. At that moment, everything fell into place for Emily. She realized that Lord Barkis was her former husband, who had disappeared without a trace after they were married and she died. And now she knew why, he had been after her dowry all along. In a fit of rage, Emily lunged at Lord Barkis, but he was too quick for her. He drew out his sword and with a menacing smile, aimed it at Victor. But in a shocking turn of events, Emily stepped between them, taking the blow meant for Victor. As she fell to the ground, Emily's words were directed at Lord Barkis. Leave, and never return. You have no place in this world or the next, she said. As Lord Barkis ran out of the church, the dead began to appear. It was a strange sight, but Victor and Victoria were too caught up in their emotions to question it. The dead dragged Lord Barkis underground, his screams of terror echoing through the church.
Chapter 8T Forgotten Kupsebriden. As T sådan set on T Small Town of Town kriger. Emily sat on T Shop T Cliff. Her long blue hair dancing in T Jently Brisse. With T sin her lys. Så gør selv out af T's tuning view. Knowing that will be T last team så will see T plads as kniv i T. Just a few hours ago, så havde med T most difficult decision of her life. Så havde set Victor fra his promise to marry her. After hours of being in law with him, så havde finally kommet to terms with T fact that he will never reciprocate her feelings. And as much as he pay ned her, så kniv that's a call på stof T kept him bound to her af ny launcher. Victor havde being hesitant først, unable to believe that Emily was truly willing to let him go. But as he said til determination in her lys, he knew that he was so has truly wanted. With a heavy hit, he tankede her for her simple sagt at EFT2 starter new life without her. And no, Emily said along on T Cliff, her heavy to lead of her decision. Cyklusset her lys, træning tog af det all her courage and strength. And ting, sommer hende mirakuløs happened. As shoppet her lys, så relayede the her body was starting to change. Så cool fale tingling sensation spreading throughout her being, and before så knew it, she had transformed into a large full swarm of butterflies. Her wings flutter og gracefully as she rose into the air, feeling free and weightless. As she fly over to town, så cool she tape up looking up in and wonder. Til uarmassede by til sig og til swarm of butterflies, unaware til tro identity of the leder. Emily fra hisser and hisser, reveling into feeling of freedom and joy. Så havde finally let go of her new attachments and havde transformed into something so much more beautiful and magnificent. And as she looked down at the town of town krig over last time, så called apostrof til helput Henk og Victor and til de particular havde together. But she also knew that he was the best decision for both of them. T var fra to findes i arven parts and happiness without being cheated down by a promise. We were final flap of her wings. Emily fra vendte til horisonten, her body no use a distant memory. Put her spirit and law of live on forever, just like the beauty of the butterflies she havde bekommet. From that era, TP oplevede town krig og rum til tale of the kilo who transformed into a swarm of butterflies and fly away, a symbol of flow and freedom. And as for Emily, så knew that she havde med til right choice, for some times, let things go east til only way to truly find happiness. TN